Happy Hanukkah and welcome to our 8th night of candlelighting at Mahar for the 2024/2025 Hanukkah season. We're on our 8th night of Hanukkah. It is January 1st, 2025, and we are here with our Hanukkah, our Hanukkah menorah, and you can see we've got all of the candles in. Tonight's the last night of Hanukkah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about something that maybe has occurred to you, but we haven't actually mentioned very much at all, which is why even do this? We're humanistic Jews, and we don't feel commanded, usually, to light Hanukkah candles, right? The idea of divine commands from outside telling us to do something don't usually fit most humanistic Jewish families, and even if it did, the traditional blessing says, who commanded us to light the Hanukkah lights, and there's no commandment in the Torah for Hanukkah lights, and for that matter, there's no commandment in the Torah for Shabbat candles. So what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And it gets even more complicated for humanistic Jews to celebrate Hanukkah once you learn the backstory. Because the backstory is that the people who really led the Maccabean revolt were effectively religious pietists, right? They were very, very kind of, in our world, we would call them right-wing or fundamentalist or even extremist religious Jews. And when you kind of put it in that context, celebrating Hanukkah gets a little bit tricky. And then the fundamental story that the tradition hands us is much less focused on what the Maccabees did, and much less focused on human agency, and much more focused on the oil lasted for 8 days, and that's the miracle, right? The miracle isn't the military victory. The miracle isn't some other human agency kind of thing. It's this one cruse of oil lasted for 8 days. And that's not really a thing we'd want to focus on as humanistic Jews. So why are we even celebrating this holiday? I guess it goes without saying that Hanukkah has been reinterpreted, and the Maccabees and who the Maccabees are has been reinterpreted a number of different times. So without going too far into the weeds, because I spent a lot of time in graduate school studying the Maccabean revolt in a number of different ways, and nobody has to do that to themselves the way I did. Let's talk a little bit about the different pictures of the Maccabees that we've had over the years. So, when we're kind of tracing through, if we go past sort of the traditional stories, one of the earliest modern reinterpretations of the Maccabees that grabs a lot of people's attention, and certainly grabs mine, is in the work of Bialik, Jewish poet from Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Bialik worked, among other things, as a journalist. And in the early 1900s, 1903, 1904, 1905, there were pogroms in Eastern Europe that Bialik reported on. And in reporting on these things, he also wrote poetry. And he reported on one of these pogroms, which turned into kind of a massacre. And one of the things that he does is he counterposes the Maccabees with a pigsty. And he does this because Jews who were swept up in this particular pogrom hid from their oppressors, sometimes in pigsties. And so he's kind of saying, the children of the Maccabees, who are these people who are hiding? And it's one of these things where it's, sure, there's a historical connection and there's this rhetorical connection happening, but Bialik's not super religious. He's had a traditional religious education of some kind, right? But he's not super religious, but he wants to lionize the Maccabees. He wants to really celebrate the Maccabees as brave, that this is what the Jewish people should be, right? And this is an idea that carries forward into Zionism, and it should be said, Bialik's a Zionist. So that idea carries forward into Zionism, and Zionism itself reinterprets the picture of the Maccabees versus the picture of the Jew in the diaspora who's weak and unable to fight for themselves. So we have this particular picture of the Maccabees, and it doesn't focus on their religious identity, it focuses on courage against non-Jews. So that picture carries forward, and Bialik writes another poem that's specifically about the Maccabees, and again, it's a very secularized kind of picture. The Maccabees then become important in Israeli culture and in Zionist culture and in the culture of the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine after World War I up to 1947, 1948, when the British leave Palestine and hand the mandate over to the UN. So that's one set of pictures of the Maccabees that we have and that we can kind of bring to the table. And then the Maccabees become kind of a stand-in at times for the idea of Jewish courage in the face of oppression. So that's one way of looking at it, is living in the modern world requires some courage too. And even if we're worried about the religious nature of this particular set of role models, they are nevertheless Jewish role models, and we're free to kind of take their ideas and their images and reinterpret them, right? So that's one particular way of doing it. Another way of doing that is then take that idea of courage, but then refract it back through our own Western perspectives on what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be religious, what it means to be spiritual, or what it means to have courage, right? And so that gives us songs like Not by Might, Not by Might, Not by Power, but by Spirit alone, right? So sometimes you'll hear just by Ruach alone, or Ruach just means spirit, right? So sometimes we take that picture and we interpret it even more, and we turn it into not physical courage, but spiritual courage. And for a lot of humanistic Jews, the word spiritual is a little bit of like an allergy kind of a word. It provokes a little bit of a negative response. But for others, the idea of spiritual strength of some kind is actually a pretty persuasive idea. And so another reason to kind of celebrate Hanukkah is, again, celebrating some kind of spiritual courage as well as sort of the physical courage necessary to just be in the world. We could just take the name of Hanukkah, right? We talked about at the beginning of all of this that Hanukkah means dedication. And so, here's a holiday that focuses on dedication to some kind of Jewish identity. And then there's modern scholarship, which is always trying to get at like what really happened, and has acknowledged that there's going to be a lot we don't know because we're relying on a very limited number of written sources. Most of them are originally written in Greek. The ones that aren't were originally written probably in Aramaic because people weren't really using Hebrew as much of a spoken language by this point in time, although the book of Daniel, the second half of the book of Daniel, is in Hebrew and is really from the Maccabean revolt and from the middle of it. So maybe we look at what modern scholarship does, and modern scholarship has some very interesting takes. So one of them is trying to figure out what Antiochus was doing in the temple, and says he tried to create a cult to Zeus or something like that. That we really don't know. We don't have physical evidence for that. They cleaned out the temple, and we don't know. But there are some Jewish scholars who took the picture of the Maccabees versus other Jews. And remember, we said that there's this internal struggle between Jews who are Hellenizing, Jews who want to be more Greek, and Jews who are not so interested in that, right? The Maccabees are on the not so interested in that side. So there are modern scholars who have kind of said, the analogy that we should be making here is liberal Jews versus Orthodox Jews. And pivoting some of how we talk about this to make the Maccabees a little bit of a set of bad guys. Because the scholars who are doing this are connected often to the Reform movement. Elias Bickerman and some other early ones from the first half of the 20th century, they're really connected more to the Reform movement, and they see themselves in that. So that's a challenge, because as humanistic Jews, we probably don't situate ourselves with the Maccabees, really. If we met them, we would find ourselves having much more in common with the Hellenizing Jews that the Maccabees were opposed to, which really makes Hanukkah complicated, right? Because now we're identifying with the bad guys in the traditional story. And that makes it really complicated. But there's a perceived understanding now that really we're more diverse. And maybe the Maccabees aren't the best role model. And so how do we reshape this holiday? And can we reaffirm Jewish commitments while not being the pietist version of it that we see in the Maccabees? And that's a harder question, and that's a thing that you kind of have to answer for yourself. Does this work? And then there's whatever reasons you found for yourself to celebrate the holiday. And one of the things that's most persuasive for me personally in celebrating the holiday is this. There are certain things we do that just make us recognizably Jewish. We still celebrate Passover. We have a Passover Seder. We don't say exactly the same things, but the 4 questions are there. We talk about the 10 plagues, but we talk about them and we don't celebrate the 10 plagues. I don't think we should be celebrating the 10 plagues. I want to be really clear. We mark the high holidays. We still mark Purim. Humanistic Judaism is a little less enthusiastic about marking Shavuot, right? This holiday that's traditionally understands itself as being about the giving of the Torah at Sinai. But study is still important. And celebrating study is still an important thing for humanistic Jews. And Hanukkah is one of those things. In fact, it's one of the biggest markers of Jewish identity there is in the United States, right? What do people celebrate? We know what people celebrate. The Pew Survey comes out every few years and tells us what American Jews do. And what American Jews do is Passover, Hanukkah, and Rosh Hashanah and our Yom Kippur. Those are the big ones. And Hanukkah happens during the holiday season. And so it's hard to be recognizably Jewish if you aren't going to do Hanukkah. So it's sometimes time to rethink why we do things and to find some personal value when maybe the traditional values are not the ones that we'd want to affirm. I'm not telling you you have to accept any of these, but I am saying there's a lot of possible reasons and a lot of different ways to think about it, even when we know that the Maccabees themselves are not people who would have liked us very much, and we likely would not have liked them very much. I kind of am guessing. So with that, we're really kind of at the end of our time. It's time to light the Hanukkah menorah for the last night of Hanukkah for the 2024-2025 Hanukkah season, with one additional note. If you are a Mahar member, you've got a kid in the school or you don't, we're having a Hanukkah party a little bit after Hanukkah on January 4th. Take a look at your emails from Mahar. See if you can't come. We'll have games. We'll have a Havdalah ceremony that we're doing along with Beth Chai, so it'll be a humanistic Havdalah ceremony. Our partners at Kehillah Chadashah will be doing a more traditional Havdalah ceremony. You can pick whichever one you want to go to. And we'll have games and food and all of the things that you expect from a Hanukkah party. We're just having it a little bit after Hanukkah because of how Hanukkah falls out this holiday season while everybody is on winter break and often not even in town to do the holiday with us. So we kind of move the party to later. So hopefully if you're a Mahar member, you are able to join us on January 4th. Take a look at your email to see what the deal is with arrangements and RSVPs and all of that. So now it's time to light the menorah for the last night of Hanukkah. And as always, you're taking it on faith that I put things in right to left and we're lighting left to right. Nivarech et ha'or ba'olam. Nivarech et ha'or ba'adam. Nivarech et ha'or shel Hanukkah. Let us bless the light in the world. Let us bless the light in humanity. Let us bless the light of Hanukkah. I had to put the candles out so that I didn't have the smoke detector going off. In any event, we're grateful for smoke detectors too, right? So anyway, the idea of blessing is to express gratitude. So I am also thankful for you coming and joining us for this holiday season. Chag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy New Year.